Hi, everyone. My name is Lily. I'm the Billing and Office Manager here at Community Health Resource Center. Thank you for joining us for the second session of our Chronic Kidney Disease and Nutrition series. Today's presentation will focus on nutrition recommendations for CKD. We'll provide an overview of CKD symptoms, lab values, and possible complications as CKD progresses. We'll also cover strategies for preventing kidney damage and preserving kidney function through nutrition, including a review of dietary recommendations, nutrients of concern, and the role of nutrition counseling in managing CKD. I'd like to thank our partner, the National Kidney Foundation, for helping make this series possible. Before we get started, I'd just like to share a little bit about our organization for those who haven't joined our programs in the past. Community Health Resource Center is a nonprofit organization here in San Francisco. We were established nearly 40 years ago by doctors at California Pacific Medical Center to provide resources and care that would supplement their work with patients to support their overall health and well-being. Today, we provide four main areas of service: social work or behavioral health services, nutrition counseling, community health screenings, and health education. This series is a culmination of two of our areas of service: nutrition counseling and health education. This week, we're continuing our series with Elena Zidaru, registered dietitian and the director of our nutrition team. She is passionate about working in the outpatient setting and supporting her clients achieve their health goals. She provides individualized nutrition counseling for weight loss and disease prevention, as well as management of various medical conditions such as cancer, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, gastrointestinal disorders, cystic fibrosis, and more. Elena's goal is to meet clients where they are and help them set realistic, achievable goals for lasting health behavior change. As a reminder, the information provided in today's presentation is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. I'd now like to pass it along to Doris Liu from National Kidney Foundation to introduce herself and share a little bit about their organization.
Okay, yeah, Lily, thank you so much. So my name is Doris Liu. I'm with the National Kidney Foundation, and we always look forward to this series, this very important and popular series, because we know that people want to learn about nutrition and how it relates to kidney disease. So a little bit about our organization. National Kidney Foundation is an organization that is revolutionizing the fight against kidney disease. We do that through three main focus. We want to eliminate preventable kidney disease. We want to accelerate innovation and dismantle structural inequities so that everyone can have equal access to kidney care, dialysis, and transplantation. I want to emphasize, I want to highlight that we are, oh, it's not forwarding. Oh, there it goes. Okay, that we, through nutrition, that plays a huge part in preventing kidney disease. So kudos to all of you for being here and being proactive in your kidney health. Our website has a nutrition hub. It has lots of very important information. You can find that at kidney.org/nutrition. These slides will be shared with you as well, so no need to copy this address. We have an NKF Cares helpline. That is a kidney information line where you can call in or email and get information about kidney health, kidney disease, about dialysis, transplant, anything having to do with kidney. And NKF Peers is our peer mentor program. This is for anybody who wants to talk to somebody who has been there before. You might be somebody who wants to have a one-time chat or have ongoing support with somebody who's been through kidney disease. You might be somebody who is exploring living donation. You can talk to a living donor, a care partner as well. Both NKF Cares and NKF Peers are available in Spanish. We have an online community as well that focuses on dialysis. There's one that focuses on transplant, kidney disease in general. And so there you can find information and read what others are discussing about their kidney experience. We have a education hub where you can learn for free through video format anything about kidney disease, the basics about chronic kidney disease. You can learn about transplant, life after transplant, becoming a living donor, and more. This is available also in Spanish. Kidney Walk is an event that you can find near you. You can go to kidneywalk.org. For those of you in Southern California, this is a big event that will be held on September 28th in Griffith Park. Those of you in Northern California, we have it every summer. This past June, we had it at PayPal Park in San Jose, a very great venue, great turnout, and really, really a great way to connect with the kidney community. We would love to see you there, so please join us. Kidney.org is where you can find lots more information. You can click on the profile that best fits you if you're a patient or you are an advocate or a medical professional. Just click on the button that takes you to the information that you want. If you are here to learn about nutrition, we have a button, lots of information about that. If you go there, you can find recipes, you can customize and input your profile, whether you are someone who's on dialysis or someone who's early stages of kidney disease. You can get recipes that fit whatever stage you are in, and lots of just general nutrition information there as well. We've been getting a lot of calls about the legislative activities that's been going on in our Capitol and in Congress. And so you can go to kidney.org/take action to find more information, or you can call us anytime. There's lots going on. People are concerned about Medicare. So we have lots of tips on how to advocate to get the care you need and for the legislation that advocates for kidney patients. Lastly, I want to thank Sutter Health, CPMC, for supporting today's program, and we could not do it without you. Lily, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Doris. All right, I think we're all set. I'll pass it along to Elena to go ahead and get into the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Lily, and welcome everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're gonna have, it's week 2, and we're gonna actually dive into the nutrition part, which I know a lot of you were interested from the beginning. So we kind of started slow with the kidney function and chronic kidney disease stages, but today we're gonna be able to talk about nutrition component. And the third week, which is next week, we're gonna actually put all this information even more in place and in more concrete kind of actions and ways to change your diet if you're interested. So the class outline for today, we're going to talk about the benefits of nutrition at any stage of CKD, dietary patterns for CKD that's been shown to be helpful and healthy, and some nutritional considerations for specific nutrients like protein, sodium, potassium, phosphorus. So the current research states the medical nutrition therapy improves biomarkers and slows time for dialysis. And this is some data from 2016. So people with CKD that receive MNT, which is medical nutrition therapy, were less likely to start dialysis and had improved nutritional biomarkers than participants who did not receive nutrition advice. So the nutrition interventions have demonstrated improvements in glucose control, blood pressure control, slowing CKD progression, and delaying the need for dialysis. So all those 4. So a lot of the nutrition benefits would be because you manage better blood sugar and blood pressure, but also can benefit just slowing the CKD progression, but not putting more strain on your kidneys, for example, when you adjust protein and things that we're going to talk more today. Eating more plant-based diets may help prevent and slow the progression of CKD, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease. So that's another kind of finding from research studies. There's also increasing evidence demonstrating that plant-dominant low-protein diets reduce the risk of developing CKD progression and its related complications, including cardiometabolic disease, metabolic acidosis, mineral and bone disorders, and uremic toxin generation. Because sometimes uremia, which is basically too many basically waste products that are circulating in your blood that your kidneys are not able to filter out. Those, that uremia state, when you have too much waste in your blood that your kidneys cannot filter, can create their own set of complications. However, plant-based diets are not routinely being offered as a treatment option by nephrologists, or just in general, even when you do an online search. If you look right now, kidney diets, they might not be just the first information that pops up. So we still have some more work to do, but it's important to know that disease progression can be delayed with dietary changes and dietary approaches. So that's kind of the message for today. So in adults with CKD stages 1 to 5, not on dialysis or post-transplantation, a Mediterranean diet pattern, plant-based, may improve lipid profiles. Also, for stages, another study showed adults with CKD stages 1 to 4, when they increase fruits and vegetables, so fruit and vegetable intake, they decrease body weight, blood pressure, and this net acid production. So the acid load on the kidneys, what we call, or this net acid production, NEAP, which can be beneficial for kidneys health. Guidelines recommend low protein diets to reduce the progression of kidney disease. There's also increasing research showing that plant-based low protein diets may benefit kidney health. So several years back, maybe even a decade back, we were not sure what would be, okay, we were saying lower protein, but we were not sure exactly where's that protein coming from. Is it more plant, more animal-based? Actually, we thought that animal-based would be better. Maybe 78% of that protein should be animal-based. Now we actually know that 50% or more plant-based would be better. And we'll dig more into the further slides, but this is just, it can show you how nutrition science kind of evolves and changes. And as we learn more, we can update some of the guidelines we have. So a large body of evidence has shown that lower dietary protein intake is associated with decreased proteinuria. So that protein in the urine that I talked about last week, when your protein kind of leaches out in the urine where it's not supposed to be, CKD progression, and uremic complications. So I have here this various types of plant-based protein dietary regimens. So basically, you probably keep hearing plant-based, and I see a lot of confusion around what plant-based is. And the reality is that a lot of people think plant-based is like, oh, I need to be vegan. Well, not necessarily, unless you choose to for different other reasons, and if it's something realistic that you could do. But plant-based, the definition is when you look at your plate, the majority of time, so 80-90% of the meals in a week, not 100%. We can have 1 or 2 meals of exceptions, but most meals in a week, when you look at your plate, more than half of the foods on that plate should come from plants, So, for example, the minimum would be this: a third, what I call a third of the plate are vegetables, a third of a plate can be a healthy starch, and a third of a plate a lean protein. This way, 66% or 2/3 of the plate are coming from plants, right? Between the healthy carbohydrate and the vegetables. So that could be an example of more than half. It can be other ratios on the plate: half a plate vegetables if you're trying also to lose weight, and then a quarter the starch and a quarter protein. This way you have 75%. Once in a while, if you're not ready to be vegan, but you could choose to have one meal a week, maybe 100% plant-based. So the protein is also plant-based. So there are different options here. So we have the plateau, what we call plant-dominant low-protein diet for kidney disease, which means that it's a lower protein diet for CKD, somewhere between 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And I'll show you the protein, how we calculate those, with at least 50% from plant-based sources. Then we have the plat fond, which is basically a plateau diet, but it's for people with diabetes. So you have the same protein recommendations, so not as much protein, just 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, with at least 50% from plant-based sources. But this is for people with diabetes that also you want to focus on lower glycemic foods for diabetes control and blood sugar control. And so that's basically the only difference. Sometimes people ask, what's the difference between plateau and plat fond? The plat fond is for diabetics that also have to watch the carbs and the glycemic index of the carbs, so trying not to spike your blood sugar. Then we have the DASH diet I mentioned last week. So DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. For somebody that has high blood pressure that led to CKD, it's a good kind of diet to maybe consider following, because it focuses on lowering blood pressure. It's lower sodium, but it's also high in plant-based foods like fruits and vegetables, so a little bit higher potassium to balance the blood pressure better. And of course, some of you would say, well, but potassium may not be as good for kidneys. Well, depending on the stage of the kidney disease and also how your potassium labs look like. And when we're going to get to the potassium information, we'll get on more details there. But for most people in stage 3A, B, with normal potassium levels, we're still going to recommend like a DASH diet, especially if you have high blood pressure. Then we have Mediterranean diet, which basically it's still in that area. It's more focusing on whole plant foods, with lean protein, with some lean dairy and seafood. The Mediterranean diet focuses more on healthy fats like olive oil and avocado and fish, up to 12 ounces a week. So you get more omega-3 fatty acids. So it's also like a heart health diet. And especially if you're at higher risk of cardiovascular disease, this could be, and you also have CKD, this could be a good option for you. Flexitarian diet. So this is like a semi-vegetarian. So this is something when people cannot really commit for being vegan or vegetarians even, but they're committed to not eat as much meat or chicken or like animal products, but they say, I could eat sometimes, right? When I feel like, or I want it, or when I'm in a social situation where don't have a lot of choices. So they don't eat on a regular basis. They might not eat daily meat or chicken, but they might eat a few times a week, and they're flexitarians. And most of the time they're more plant-based, either vegan or vegetarians. Then we have the vegetarian diet, which probably more of you are familiar with, which will exclude the meat, beef, pork, chicken, and may include fish if you're pescatarian. But if you're just vegetarian, will include likely dairy and eggs. Or there are variations, right? Lacto-vegetarian, where you just include the dairy but no eggs, or ovo-vegetarian, you exclude the dairy but you keep the eggs. So there are definitely variations within vegetarian diets. We have a whole food plant-based diet that emphasizes the consumption of whole plant-based foods as opposed to more processed, refined foods. They're still limiting the animal products, so it's more plant-based, but also those diets focus mainly on I'm eliminating the processed foods. I'm just eating whole foods that I know, they're minimally processed. They're just maybe harvest like fruits and vegetables and legumes and things like that. And then we have the vegan diet, which is probably all familiar. Basically excludes all the animal-based products, from meat to also byproducts such as eggs and dairy and fish. So it's 100% plant-based, the vegan, right? The other ones are certain percentages. The way I said, it should be more than 50% to be in the category of plant-based. But as you can see, there are lots of variations. But the bottom line here, plant-based is the way to go as a pattern. Now, moving forward, why the plant-based diet is so beneficial with less animal protein and more plant-based protein. Well, first of all, we'll have more fiber, and fiber actually can help the gut health and decrease those uremic toxins. So the accumulation of those waste products that are not easily excreted from your through your kidneys. Can actually decrease hyperphosphatemia, so decrease the ability of, the accumulation of phosphorus in your blood. A lot of plant-based foods, they have phytates and fiber, which can actually bind the naturally occurring phosphorus in foods. And as we're going to talk at the phosphorus slides, the naturally occurring phosphorus in foods, if they're plant-based foods like nuts, for example, or beans, those phytates and fibers in those foods will actually bind the phosphorus and not allow it to be absorbed. So your body does not have to deal with a lot of phosphorus. It can decrease the acid load on the kidneys. As we mentioned, a lot of plant-based foods will actually create a more alkaline urine. So they're not creating this acidic urine, so increasing the acid load on the kidneys, and that can decrease the risk of metabolic acidosis. Can decrease that state of having protein in the urine. When you have more plant-based foods and plant-based protein, people won't have as much proteinuria, and can increase the magnesium intake that actually has a positive effect on cardiovascular health because can decrease vascular calcification. So all those potential benefits of the plant-based diet when you're going to choose more plant-based protein versus animal protein. I wanted to show you here the 75% plant-based. So you can have half a plate vegetables and then quarter healthy starch, quarter a lean protein. This is an example how the vegetable can be different things, can be some cooked vegetable and salad combination. It doesn't have to be all cooked or all salad or all raw veggies. You could kind of do it the way you want. And then we have here I think that's some brown rice and some grilled chicken. And now next week we're gonna have, when we're gonna kind of put this information more into practice, I'm gonna revisit those plant-based diets and how, a day of eating can look like on those dietary patterns. But right now we're going to revisit the nutrients of concern, such as protein, sodium, potassium, and phosphorus. So how much protein should I eat? I know a lot of you ask, like, okay, what is that low protein or lower protein? How much protein do I actually need to eat? So it's been controversial for the past several years in terms of how much protein would be too much, because the reality is that, protein is not a bad nutrient for us. It's pretty good and healthy, and we need it. And we definitely don't want to become malnourished or lose muscle mass, but it's also hard to do very low protein diets in general, like what you're going to eat. It's hard to feel satiated if you don't eat protein. So it's not about not eating protein. It's just eating just enough to not be too much, to put more strain on your kidneys, and not be too low to increase risk of malnutrition or muscle mass loss. So until we have more well-designed randomized control trials, we kind of want a low to medium protein diet. So not a super low protein diet, but again, we need to keep an eye on how much protein we get. A plant predominant low to medium protein diet, 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day, with more than 50% plant-based protein sources. This is the recommendation. Now, in certain cases, or especially if people have advanced kidney and, like, let's say a low moderate protein did not really help as much with CKD progression. So they have CKD progression for other reasons. People can try a very low protein diet, VLPD, what I have here is an acronym, which is way lower, 0.28 to 0.43 grams dietary protein per kilogram per day, with additional keto acids, which are, or amino acid analogs to meet the protein requirements. So you want to still have a total protein in a day of 0.55 to 0.6 at least, but the 0.28 to 0.43 grams of protein per kilogram per day can come from foods, and the rest would be supplemented with those keto acids, which are basically what they are. They are keto analog are basically supplements, medical food. They look like a powder. They will provide extra protein to a very low protein diet without providing additional nitrogen that can put a strain on the kidneys. So basically, it doesn't break down into the nitrogen waste material of protein metabolism, because that's the one that kind of puts more strain on the kidneys. So, but your body gets some protein for the preservation of muscle mass. So there are some studies that show that can slow reduce CKD progression and the onset of uremic symptoms and improve nutritional markers. The keto analogs they're not related with ketogenic diet, right? Which is something different. It's a high fat, low carbohydrate kind of diet. And this is the dose that's recommended. But as I said, in general, I would use that as a recommendation. I would use what's bold here, trying to do it through food, versus when that doesn't work and it's more advanced and you're really trying to delay the dialysis, and you could try this, the keto acids, the amino acid analogs supplementation, because again, it comes in a powder form. You have to mix it with water and get it, and it's just it's just an option, but that should be used only in combination with very low protein diets. Now, for people with diabetes and CKD stages 3 to 5, it is reasonable, as I said, to recommend 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day to maintain a stable nutritional status and optimize the glycemic control. Especially for people with diabetes, it's kind of harder to have a very low protein diet because you also have to control the carbs. It's like what you're gonna eat. And people, as I said, protein helps with satiety and a lot of other things. Now, I want to differentiate, even though with this presentation, we're not addressing the stage 5 CKD on hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis. But the protein needs for people in any form of dialysis are way higher because you lose some protein through the dialysis process. So you need about 1 to 1.2 grams protein per kilogram per day. So those recommendations, 0.6 to 0.8, I want to say they're for stages 3 to 5. So the protein type, I mentioned already that animal versus plant, more than 50% plant-based seems to be the way to go. And eating less processed foods and less meat lessens the production also of AGEs, which are advanced glycation end products. Those glycation end products have been associated with increase. So when we have more AGEs in our body, they're associated with increased CKD progression. So we're eating less processed foods and less animal protein like meats, we decrease the production of AGEs in our body. So ways to limit those AGEs production, those byproducts. So ways to do that, you limit high fat, high protein animal products, high sugar and processed foods. So trying to eat more whole foods. Limit the cooking with dry heat at high temperatures, like, roasting, grilling. So it's better to cook with moist heat at lower temperatures and for shorter time. But also cooking meats with acidic ingredients. So marinate the meat before cooking can help with actually decreasing the production of those ages. So you can use either tomato juice or vinegar or lemon juice. Cooking over ceramic surfaces such as slow cookers would help decreasing ages. Regular exercise, but also eating more whole foods, as I said, and less processed foods. So the cooking method can help. The idea here is more moist heat, lower temperature, lower cooking temperatures. And especially when you need to grill or do more dry, high heat type of cooking, I would use for sure, I would marinate, the meats or chicken or whatever you're cooking. Now, I want to give you an example of how to calculate daily protein. So we use the 0.6 to 0.8 recommendation. And first of all, you take your current weight and you divide by 2.2 to find weight in kilogram. And then you multiply the 0.6 with 0.8. It's a little bit tricky because depending on your BMI and your weight. So if you're a certain level of BMI, so more overweight, we could use an adjusted weight versus your regular weight because we're trying to create this recommendation based on the muscle mass versus total body weight, which can be more body fat. Let's say if you have a BMI of 30 plus, and we don't want to kind of give more protein for a type of weight that's not as metabolically active as the body fat, because the muscles are metabolically active and those are the ones we want to preserve. So some people need to use an adjusted weight versus their regular weight in pounds. But the formula is basically you divide by 2.2, find the weight in kilogram, and then you multiply by 0.6. and then by 0.8, and you find your range. I have an example here, a female that's 5'5", 136 pounds. And then you divide the 136 pounds by 2.2, and you get 61.8 kilograms. And you multiply that by 0.6, so that's 37 grams of protein. And the upper range will be 49. So basically the daily protein intake should range in between 37 and 49 grams of protein for someone like her. Now I have a list of foods with, and Lily will provide the slides. So you have all this information. So we don't need to go through all in details, but basically you could see how the main source of protein will be any type of meat. On 1 ounce, you get 7 grams. Dairy products in 1 cup or 1 ounce of cheese, you get 7-8 grams. But starches have some protein. They're not protein foods, but they will provide some protein. So a slice of bread or a third of a cup of cooked pasta or rice can have somewhere between 2 to 3 grams of protein. Vegetables in half a cup cooked, you can have 1 gram. But fruits and fats and oils, not much, right? 0. So no protein here. But basically the carbohydrates, the starches, and some vegetables can add a little bit of extra protein. Not significant though. Now I have here a protein list with the main food sources of protein from a deck of cards, 3 ounces, that's 21 grams of protein, to a cup of milk, that's 8 grams, or Greek yogurt, you could see you get the same amount of protein in 3 ounces as you get to a regular yogurt in 6 ounces. So Greek yogurt, just to be aware, it's more concentrated in protein. The process of making it concentrates the protein. So usually in the same amount may have double the amount of protein than the regular yogurt. And then we have other foods like an ounce of cheese can have 7 grams of 2 tablespoons of Parmesan, 4 grams. I'm not going to go through all of them because you're going to get those lists. And then I want to show you a lot of the, on this side, a lot of the plant-based proteins. Quarter cup of nuts, it's about 7 grams, or 2 tablespoons of nut butters. It's usually between 5 and 7, depending on the type of product. Half a cup of beans or lentils, 7 grams. Hummus, quarter cup, 6 grams. Tofu, half a cup, 10 grams. So we can go, and then quinoa, 1 full cup of quinoa has 9 grams of protein. 1 full cup of brown rice or cooked rice, white rice, it's about 5 grams. I wanted to show you a sample menu how 37 at the lower range of the protein recommendations that I calculated for you, for that woman. So a sample menu for 37 grams of protein with more than half plant-based. How does it look like? Breakfast, you can have 3/4 cup oatmeal with some honey, 3 grams. Again, if you're diabetic versus you're not, you could be more flexible with the honey. Plus 1/4 cup of nuts, plus a tablespoon of ground flax seeds, plus 1 cup of strawberries. So this breakfast here total has about 10 grams of protein already out of the 37. Lunch, sandwich with 2 slices of bread, about 4 grams of protein, with 2 ounces of tuna salad, 14 grams, lettuce, tomato, mustard, mixed green salad, an apple. So that's about 18 grams of protein at that lunch. And then dinner, we have a more plant-based one with the quinoa bowl with half a cup of cooked quinoa, 1/4 cup of cooked black beans mixed in, some chopped cucumber, tomatoes, and avocado, a cup of raspberries. So that's roughly 8 grams of protein. And if we add all of them up, it's about 37 grams of protein. So moving forward, again, this can be just an example. We want to move to sodium. Sodium, it's naturally occurring in many foods, but it's not going to be high level of sodium. So random foods from dairy products to celery, just a bunch of foods will naturally have sodium in them, but they're not having a lot. So we can say those foods are high sodium. And it's okay, because guess what? We need some sodium in our body. We need at least a minimum of 500 milligrams of sodium every day for our body to function properly. But sodium is something we get too much in our diet, and unfortunately not from naturally occurring sodium in foods. We get most of the sodium in our diet from processed foods. Some foods, they use sodium as a preservative, but sometimes they use more sodium for flavor. Cooking, especially restaurant cooking, brings a lot of sodium, regardless if it's a fast food place versus a fine dining. I think it's safe to assume that the restaurant meal will have much more sodium than a home cooked meal, because you have more control to adjust the sodium. So table salt, the one we use at home for cooking, has about, I want to kind of differentiate between salt and sodium, because sodium is the nutrient that we need to kind of address here, but table salt is not 100% sodium. It's 40% sodium and 60% chloride, because table salt is sodium chloride. And this is the percentage that those two minerals are in: 40% sodium, 60% chloride. So salt and sodium conversions, I have here some examples. 1/4 teaspoon salt is about 500 milligrams of sodium. In a whole teaspoon of salt, so if you have to have that in a day, that's your 2000 milligrams sodium. That would be a good recommendation for somebody with either high blood pressure or kidney disease. So we usually say somewhere between 1500 to 2000, or 2000 or less. That's kind of the recommendation we use. But why high sodium, how high sodium contributes to the blood pressure is because you have high blood pressure, the sodium holds on to the water, actually. So it kind of keeps more the water in your body, can increase the blood volume and the blood pressure. That can damage kidney blood vessels. The kidneys can remove waste and extra fluids, and then you have even more buildup of fluid in blood vessels that could actually exacerbate your blood pressure, and then it's this vicious cycle that kind of keeps happening. So as I mentioned, the recommendations is, I like to say limit to 2000 milligrams or lower. For CKD, we use the 15 to 23. I mean, 23 milligrams of sodium per day is the recommendation for any healthy adult in the US. We tend to consume much more, but this would be ideal for anybody, regardless if they have high blood pressure or not. And as I said, I like for people with CKD and high blood pressure to say 1500 to 2000. Regular table salt, sea salt, kosher salt, Himalayan salt, I mean, Celtic salt. There's so many types where they're all equal when it comes to sodium content. But the only difference is that some, the granules of salt are bigger for some salts versus the others. So when you measure in a teaspoon, let's say some sea salt that has bigger crystals can have less because it's just less volume. But if you were to compare per grams of sodium, if you measure with a scale, not take a teaspoon, right? You measure in grams, that salt would have the same amount of sodium. I tell people, if you like, for example, I had patients that I work with, and they said, oh, I like Himalayan salt because it salts better and I use less. And that's great because that helps you actually to use less sodium. So, some people say that some salts are better, they salt better, and then as a consequence, they use less of it. That's great. If that works for you, I would use that salt because of that. But I want to make sure that everybody understands per gram, per weight of product, they're all the same in terms of sodium content. It's going to be 40% sodium, 60% chloride. We usually for CKD recommend to avoid using salt substitutes like light salt, no salt, or products labeled lower salt because they tend to replace the sodium chloride, at least some of it, with potassium chloride. And again, depending on your stage of kidneys and if you need to manage the potassium, there may not be a good idea to eat those, to use those products. High sodium foods are usually processed foods, fast food, restaurant food. As I mentioned, that's the biggest category. Most frozen and canned foods, but again, there are plenty of frozen vegetables with no salt added. There are plenty of canned foods right now that they say no salt added and they don't add any salt. So I don't want people to think that those frozen foods or canned foods cannot be very good, healthy options. They are, but you have to read your labels to make sure, because some canned foods can have quite a bit of sodium. Smoke and cure meats usually are high sodium, even the healthy and tasty smoked salmon. I like smoked salmon, but it is quite high in sodium. You get about 500 milligrams or more per serving. Most cheeses are high in sodium, just the process of making them higher, not as high as a processed meat or even smoked salmon. They usually, per an ounce of cheese, you might get somewhere between 200 to 300 milligrams, but it's still considered higher. What's more than 200 milligrams of sodium per serving, it's kind of in the high sodium category. Then we have pickles, sauerkraut, olives. So those foods, especially the fermented foods like pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, I mean, they're healthy for your gut. They're good fermented foods, but they're high in sodium. So if you have high blood pressure, CKD, you have to be more careful with, I won't say to not use them at all, but how much you're using it, right? A lot of times for gut health, people ask me, it doesn't mean you have to kind of eat a jar of pickles or a big bowl of sauerkraut. A lot of times it's couple of tablespoons, a quarter cup of those added to a food, right? So the gut benefit comes with smaller amounts of fermented foods, and you don't have to eat high amounts. Most soups and salad dressings. So soups, again, if they're canned or if they're bought in a store or in a restaurant, they're going to be high sodium because they use a base to cook in bulk, and that's high salt. Salad dressing tend to be also the commercial ones versus you can make your own at home, and that would save you a lot of sodium. Most commercially prepared sauces, condiments, and seasonings or marinades, right? If you buy, for example, marinated chicken, it will be high sodium versus if you marinate your chicken in a Ziploc bag at home, and you could use none or just a little bit, depending on, you have the control to do that. Many breakfast cereals, many breads, there are sliced breads that will have 200 to 300 milligrams of sodium per slice, versus some, they may have under 100, so not much. So you always have to read the nutrition label and the ingredient lists. We have here an example. I want to teach you how to read the nutrition label. You start all the time as the first step at the serving size to understand how much is a serving. It's a cup. Okay, that's what I'm going to eat out of this product. Makes sense. Sometimes they lower the portion size, so the numbers look lower. But if you eat 3 or 4 servings out of that small portion, then you have to multiply that sodium number by 3 or 4. So be very careful to check the serving size and make sure the serving size makes sense. You can always check the calories, especially if you need to watch your weight. But the next one here is to glance at saturated fat and the sodium. So sodium and saturated fat, the rule of thumb is if it's 20 or more, that means high. So saturated fat 15%, sodium 20. That tells me this is a high sodium product, and it's also quite high in saturated fat because it's getting close to 20. Ideally, we want 5% or less for those foods to be low in sodium and low in saturated fat. So that's kind of the goal for sodium and saturated fat. Dietary fiber, 0%. Unfortunately, here we wanted 20% or more because that meant it's high in dietary fiber. So I use it, for example, the sodium. If sodium is the only thing that I'm interested in here, 20% translates into high sodium. So I need to be careful with this product. Maybe I'll look for another one that has less sodium, or maybe I will just be careful and eat less, maybe even half a cup instead of a full cup, depending on what this product is. We have here another example, 2/3 of a cup, it's our serving size, and we have sodium 7%, 160 milligrams. So it's less than 200 milligrams, the percentage is 7. It's not 5 or less, but it's pretty close. So I would say this is a good product if I need to watch the sodium. So those are some high sodium substitutes, basically instead of salt and salt seasoning like table salt or garlic salt or onion salt, you could use, or bouillon cubes, you could just use those fresh garlic or garlic powder, onion powder, or vinegar or lemon juice. So other condiments and ways to season your food without adding the sodium. For sauces, we have barbecue sauce, soy sauce, oyster sauce. Those are high sodium. We also have some alternative dry mustard, vinegar, homemade or low sodium sauces, and salad dressing that you could make at home. For cured foods like pickles and bacon and processed meats, we have some fresh alternatives. And for canned foods, we have the low or no salt added canned foods, which we have more and more available nowadays. So ways to reduce the sodium: avoid processed foods, read nutrition labels. Again, look at, we want to have 5% or less, or close to 5, or less than 200 milligrams per serving, whatever works better for you, the percentage versus the number. Limiting eating out, cook more at home. So we could still enjoy eating out maybe once or twice a week. If you eat more often, consider cutting back on that. You might save some money too. use more herbs and spice and less salt to season food. So I always say replace the salt with fresh garlic or garlic powder or vinegar or, you know, lemon juice or different other mustard, you know, there are different ways, horseradish, to add flavor to the food. Especially there are lots of herb and herb combinations, right? You can have an Italian seasoning with different herbs that taste pretty good, but doesn't have any salt. So you could add the flavor this way. Often we want an acid finish with salt, but we can get this from vinegars and lemon juice. So we could just squeeze a little bit of those in our food. Making your own condiments at home, such as sauces, dressing. I would add even the marinades, right? If you marinate your meat, especially, I mentioned that decreases the ages formation. And you could just make that at home. I love to marinate my chicken with, I put some lemon juice, some olive oil, some freshly crushed garlic. I put different herbs and very little salt, if any. And I just let it marinate, and then I cook the chicken. And you could add, as you serve the chicken, a little bit of a dash of salt, just for the taste. This way you have more control over how much sodium that food has when you basically start with 0 and then just add a dash on top when you eat it. Buy reduced sodium or no salt added canned foods. The canned foods, also the ones that have reduced sodium, they still have quite a bit of sodium. So you could rinse them in the water pretty well. That could reduce some more of the sodium, but it would be better, in my opinion, to buy the low sodium water, no salt added. And then you could season your food the way you want. Let's say I buy the non-salt added canned beans and I use them in different ways. And then I season my food. So if you eat them plain like that, of course, they're not going to have much of a taste because they have no sodium. But usually I add them to a salad or other things that I'm adding other condiments or spices or herbs. So that actually tastes pretty good in the end. Moving forward to potassium. Potassium, as a role, keeps a normal water balance and helps with muscle contraction. So it's very important, muscle contraction. Our heart is a muscle, contracts all the time. So it's important to not have too much or too low potassium in our body because that can create problems with your heart, arrhythmias. And that's why with CKD, we want to avoid having high potassium in our blood. Kidneys, they remove the excess of potassium. So let's say if we eat a lot of potassium, our kidneys will keep that balance and recycle back into your blood only a certain amount of potassium and just kind of decrease, remove and eliminate in the urine the rest of it, versus in CKD, especially more advanced stages where your kidneys are having a hard time to filter, the potassium may accumulate in your blood, and that can create irregular heartbeat. So you always, especially if you're more advanced in your kidney stage, check with your doctor what is a safe potassium level. You know, I have here some general recommendations. 3.5 to 5 is safe. 5 to 5.5, you need to be more cautious. After 5.5, it's more dangerous because it can create issues with your heart. When potassium is high, and only under that circumstance, like you need to be more cautious with portions of high potassium foods. You may need to limit. We say less than 3 milligrams a day or 3 grams a day of potassium. So you still have room to eat some potassium foods, but you might need to watch the high potassium foods, how many you eat in a day kind of thing. But I want to point out, before you restrict the diet, think of other possible causes for high potassium. You know, that are not diet related, like sometimes blood pressure medication that you're taking, or chronic constipation, uncontrolled diabetes. So trying to kind of address more the root cause of the problem versus not thinking that, oh, my kidneys are not filtering well and I need to restrict my potassium. Some diuretics can decrease potassium, and can be helpful, right? In a way to be, if you need to be on a diuretic, that you could kind of be on one that eliminates more the potassium versus the one that spares the potassium in your body. But those are conversations you have to have with your doctor. And if you have basically high potassium, check with your doctor for other possible causes before restricting even further your diet. Also, check with your doctor about the use of potassium binders, such as Lokelma. So those are more newer medications that can be taken when people have high potassium and can be helpful. So then you don't have to be super restrictive with your diet. But there's always the option to be more careful and not completely eliminate. You'll see a lot of high potassium foods are actually healthy foods that we recommend on a plant-based diet. So I want people to know that you could absolutely enjoy in moderation all those foods that are high in potassium or higher in potassium. And I'm not going to read all of them, but as you see, there's a bunch of foods from fruits, vegetables, you know, certain protein foods. Some are plant-based, some are not, nuts and seeds and beans and dry foods. And you'll have the list in your slides, but those are healthy foods, and we're trying to eat them as much as we can. So, as I mentioned, lots of foods are high in potassium. Approximately about 50 to 60% of potassium in fruits and veggies is going to be absorbed. About 80% of the potassium in animal foods is absorbed, and about 100% of potassium in processed foods is absorbed, such as salt substitutes, food additives, and preservative with potassium. So that's why I said, you know, try not to use those salt substitutes, try not to eat as many processed foods, because and then it's good to cut back on animal foods because that potassium is higher, more highly absorbed. And then fruits and vegetables, about half of it you absorb only, so are the last one to limit when needed to limiting. And this is the mechanism. Is like plant-based diet have more fiber, increases intestinal potassium excretion. So I just wanted to make that point, because if you go online, you'll see a lot of people. Even I had people with a stage 3A coming to me, no potassium, abnormal blood levels. They're trying to eat healthier for their kidneys, and they restrict a bunch of fruits and vegetables that are healthy for them. And there's really no need for that. So, in a plant-based diet, also moderation, it's a key thing. So I'm not saying just to eat 3 avocados a day, but you could have an avocado in a salad. You could have, you know, some banana in a smoothie or whatever part of your breakfast without necessarily having to eat 3 bananas a day. That would not be considered moderation. So this is talking more, I kind of mentioned that, and I don't want to read the slides. You could read more, but basically we don't want to restrict the foods that are healthy for your heart, for your kidneys, for your diabetes control or blood pressure control. So basically, we're trying to restrict as less as possible the diets, especially when it comes to healthy plant-based foods. And if you need to use a potassium binder, that could be also an option. So we still want people to adhere as much as possible to those plateau diets, plant-based, lower protein. We'll move on to phosphorus, which one of the role is to build healthy, strong bones. Again, the kidneys will remove the excess of phosphorus from your body. The same will do with potassium. And in CKD at more advanced stages, phosphorus may accumulate, which high phosphorus can actually trigger this high PTH, which is parathyroid hormone. and pulls calcium more from the bones to increase calcium in the blood. Because in CKD, we see this higher phosphorus, lower calcium in the blood. And that again will trigger your parathyroid hormone to increase. So you pull more calcium out of your bones to increase the blood calcium, but that actually increases your risk of osteoporosis and weakens your bones. So there's not a good kind of process that happens. So it's important to regulate that blood phosphorus so then this process doesn't happen. The good news here is that when we limit the protein, because we're trying to do a low moderate protein diet of 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, we're kind of decreasing the phosphorus too, because a lot of the high phosphorus foods are actually protein foods. There are some exceptions, such as phosphorus-containing additives, phosphates that are added to foods, a stabilizer, preservative, color enhancers. So there are a bunch of phosphates, what we call, that are not naturally occurring in foods, and they can affect your phosphorus level. So we're trying to avoid those processed foods that have phosphates, and also dark colas like Coke and Pepsi. Some iced teas also, they're high in phosphates. So you have to kind of read the labels. So at early stages, there really I don't want people to avoid, again, naturally occurring phosphorus foods, but I want people to be aware of saying, I want to decrease the intake of colas and those phosphorus containing additives. Again, at a low kind of advanced CKD, you might need phosphate binders that will actually bind with the phosphorus that you're eating and kind of get it flush out in your body, so to prevent the absorption. And then the naturally occurring phosphorus foods would be, as I mentioned, protein foods like meats, chicken, fish, dairy products, dry beans and peas, whole grains, nuts, seeds. And then we have also beer, chocolate, colas. And those are about 40 to 60% of it will be absorbed. And then we have phosphorus-containing additives that I mentioned, that are basically all those phosphate additives, and that's the inorganic phosphorus, and about 90% of it is absorbed by the body. So it's very important to limit those processed foods because of that. And the plant-based phosphorus is less absorbable than animal-based phosphorus, kind of the same with potassium, because it is bound to phytates and are difficult to digest by humans. So we flush out those phosphorus in plant-based foods like beans and nuts, and seeds will bind to those phytates and will be kind of eliminated through our GI tract instead of being absorbed into your bloodstream and being processed then by kidneys to make urine. So they have a different kind of way of being processed in your body. So I finished the phosphorus too. And then again, next week, we will discuss more in detail about how, how much, how to put everything kind of more in a meal plan form, but just getting the main idea of more plant-based foods are beneficial, even the ones high in potassium and phosphorus, limiting sodium, limiting processed foods. I think you get the idea. There are other nutrients of concerns or nutrition considerations for CKD. Calcium, we don't want both low or high calcium levels in our blood. So we want kind of the right amount. We don't want to exceed 2,000 milligrams of calcium per day, because that can increase calcification in our blood vessels. Some studies showed 800 to 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day. It's a good goal for people with CKD stages 3 and 4 who are not taking active vitamin D. You know, the normal recommendations for calcium intake would be between 1,000 and 1,200 milligrams, depending on your age. As we get older, we need about 1,200 milligrams. So anywhere, apparently 800 to 1,200 could be a good, but we don't want to take too much and we don't want to undertake. Vitamin D. So kidneys, as I mentioned last week, one of the roles is to activate vitamin D. And if they're not working very well, it might not happen. If you're not activating vitamin D, you might not absorb well the calcium you're eating. So people with CKD, they have increased risk of vitamin D deficiency. They need to kind of test their vitamin D levels and supplement accordingly. If blood calcium gets too high, you could stop the vitamin D supplementation. You need to kind of work with your doctor and the labs to figure out what would be a good intake for vitamin D. So I'm not going to be able to give you any recommendations. It will be just based on your lab values, but you might need to very likely to supplement. And then anemia, as I mentioned last week, kidneys produce a hormone, erythropoietin, and this EPO. Basically, when your kidneys are not producing this hormone enough, you can get anemia, you can become anemic, and some people need to, especially with later stages, to get this hormone as a medication, right? Because your kidneys are not producing it, and this way can help with managing the anemia. So then this hormone is the one that stimulates the red blood cell production. So you need it kind of taken in a medication form to be able to manage your anemia, since your kidneys may not produce this hormone anymore. What else should I know? There is no one diet that's right for everyone with kidney disease or kidney failure. And that's why a lot of times we advocate to work with someone one-on-one, like a dietitian like me. A lot of times, especially if you're more advanced stage, right? With this presentation, you get the idea of general recommendations, but as I said, there could be some specific fine-tuning recommendations based on what are the medical conditions you have, what other things are going on, what's your weight, what your weight goal is. So sometimes it's kind of hard to put everything in one box. What you can eat or cannot eat will change over time with the stages of CKD. And that's something also people need to understand. And also it's important, you have diabetes or heart disease or high blood pressure, what are the things you have in your kind of medical history. So important to reach out for some one-on-one support if you feel like you're a more complex case or you're more challenged. Sometimes I meet with people saying, you know, I have this, and that, and I feel like I have different diets for each problem, and I don't know how to put them all together because I feel some of them contradict to each other. And then we have to figure out a plan that would be managing all of the above. I have some references here that you're going to have when you receive the slides, and I think we are having some 20 minutes for questions.
That was amazing. Thank you, Elena. I'll hop into the questions here. Right. I have hyperalkemia as a result of my stage 5 CKD. How can I keep up a plant-based diet while limiting potassium intake? I'm vegetarian and beans also have potassium. It seems like my options are reducing in every dimension.
Yeah, and you're right. This is a little bit more challenging. It becomes more challenging when you have the hyperkalemia, which is high potassium in your blood. And And you know that at this point you have to manage the potassium eating, you have to be more careful. I would, as I said, consider that low Calma potassium binder, talk with your doctor, because again, may not be appropriate with everyone depending on what medications you're taking. But you could consider that as a binder, just as a support, okay, knowing that I could eat a bit more potassium, but I have this binder that helps me to get rid of this potassium in my GI tract and not get it absorbed through my blood. So that could be an option. The second would be I would prioritize the main nutrients as a vegetarian. So, well, yeah, beans are high in potassium, but you also need them for your protein needs. As I mentioned, protein needs are not as high. You need to watch them too. So it's not going to take all of that budget of 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of potassium a day, but you want to prioritize them since, you know, you need to reach your protein depending on the recommendations I gave you. Let's say you have room for 40 grams of protein in your diet. Well, that potassium can come from, I mean, the protein and potassium can be reached by beans. And then I would play more with the high potassium vegetables and fruits because there are a lot of vegetables and fruits that are on the moderate and lower potassium kind of lists. And I would try to alternate in a day and maybe use smaller amounts of the high ones or balance them with some moderate and low. So I'm trying to kind of stick in the limit as much as possible. So I would prioritize the, as I said, the protein and see what's left for the budget, and then trying to have alternative of moderate, low vegetables and fruits, because there's still going to be some plant-based foods that are lower or moderate in potassium. And I think it's possible to do it. It's going to be a little bit more challenging and obviously require a bit more planning, but this would be my advice, trying to look into the binder and also yeah, reading the labels a little bit more careful. I mentioned also the potassium kind of additives. I would avoid those for sure. And then when it comes to diet, prioritize the protein and whatever is left for vegetables and fruits. You could manage the portions and
Great. Thanks, Elena. Could you also go over using an adjusted weight to calculate protein intake? We have someone who calculated their protein intake and got a result of about 80 grams of protein per day, but they weren't sure if other factors like swimming 3 to 4 times a week, not being a smoker, not drinking, would maybe impact that recommendation.
yeah, I mean, I won't necessarily, but I think the adjusted weight would be more part of it has to be more with the weight, right, and the BMI. And I think we have a certain, for sure, if it's a BMI over 30, you could use, instead of your regular weight, an adjusted weight that usually it's a bit lower than your regular weight. So for higher BMI, when people tend to have, not always, that's another kind of thing. You know, it's not a perfect, you know, it's just not a perfect kind of way to do it. The adjusted weight, and honestly, the only reason I mention it is because sometimes people, if they tend to have more body fat, then they tend to eat more protein, and that can affect negatively their kidneys than what that formula with 0.6, 0.8 should do. Now, there are cases when you have a high BMI, but you're pretty muscular, so it's not that much body fat. And, you know, like, I want to give you this example of Arnold Schwarzenegger in his good days. He had a BMI over 30, but it was all muscle. So in this case, you might be able to eat a bit more muscle. But I think for the majority of people, when they have the 30 BMI, if there's not a lot of muscles and it's more body fat, probably having an adjusted body weight as the starting weight would be a bit more accurate. So you're not giving your kidneys too much protein, because again, the whole idea is not feeding the body fat that's not as metabolically active as the kidneys. So for example, what you could do online, you could go, there are calculators of adjusting body weight, and you could just use your height, your current weight, and there's a formula that they use, and they can give you the adjusted body weight in pounds, and then you divide that number by 2.2, you get your kilograms, and then you do the math with 0.6 and 0.8. And again, this would work probably better if you feel like, okay, I'm over BMI over 30, and I know I have more body fat than muscle mass, versus if you're super muscular, then I would not do that and use my regular body weight.
Got it. Thank you so much for clarifying that. How do I get enough calories while limiting potassium, protein, and saturated fats?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if you're not diabetic, you could use more calories from healthy carbohydrates like whole grains or starchy vegetables like, maybe corn or potatoes, or also healthy fats like avocado and olive oil. Nuts also have protein, so you could use some nut butters within your protein limit, but you need to be careful still limiting that, because we'll give you more protein. But avocado doesn't have much protein, and the same with olive oil, or let's say, avocado oil. Those are some of the healthiest, high in monounsaturated, so they're not going to increase your risk of heart disease. They're actually healthy fats, and you need more calories, and that's a way to kind of close the calorie gap, and using more sparingly, or using more abundantly your olive oil.
Great, thank you. And another question about managing multiple different kind of factors here. How do I manage potassium, phosphorus, and oxalates in my diet?
Yeah, so potassium, phosphorus, oxalates, you will see there are going to be few overlaps, not a lot. Foods high in oxalates usually are plant-based foods. I know there's spinach and raspberries and just nuts and random foods, but rutabaga, as far as I remember. So usually for the oxalate part, I would try to limit the ones that are pretty high in them, especially if you have. Now, I don't know all the background, but I usually tell people to watch oxalates if they have history of calcium oxalate kidney stones, and not just maybe one time, but they had 2 or 3 stones throughout their life. So they're prone to actually develop those stones, because they have an issue with basically handling the oxalate in foods. Most people don't have that. But if you had that history of calcium oxalate kidney stone, you want to be more careful. And I would usually limit the ones that are pretty high, like spinach, for example. Now, spinach is also high in potassium. So might be that you're not eating a lot of spinach, but there are other vegetables that I want to point out that are low to moderate in potassium, and also not having a lot of oxalate. So you could focus on those, still kind of eating on a plant-based diet. I know overall it's going to be more limiting when you have to kind of handle different things, but what I'm trying to tell people and encourage them to not focus as much on what they cannot have, to try to focus on what they can have. As I mentioned, there are going to be other fruits and vegetables that are not high in either potassium or oxalates.
Got it. Thank you. Next question, is the ketogenic diet beneficial for CKD?
not really, right? Based on what I presented today, it might not be my diet of choice to recommend for somebody with CKD, because the ketogenic diet, it's not plant-based. It's usually higher in fat and higher in protein. Like the classic ketogenic diet has 80% fat and actually not much protein. But I've seen nowadays people do a lot of adjusted keto with higher protein. So that for sure is not going to be as helpful. If you do the classic one, 70 to 80% fat and not as much protein, from a protein perspective, it's fine, but it will be very hard from a fat perspective, because people with CKD, and especially as they advance in their stages, they're a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. It's a strong correlation between CKD and heart disease. And people on a classic ketogenic diet, 70%, 80% fat, they get a lot of saturated fat in their diet. Again, and it's not much of the plant-based foods that would lower the acidic load and all the things I talked to you about. So yeah, the answer would be no.
Great, thank you. Are there any sort of better or more recommended animal protein sources for people with CKD?
Well, we want the lean type of protein that are not coming with a lot of saturated fat, just because of that heart disease piece that I mentioned. So those could be white meat, such as chicken, turkey with no skin, eggs, and fish and shellfish, right? And some leaner cuts of red meat. We still probably limit the red meat more to, maybe a couple of times a week. For sure, less than 12 ounces in a week, if possible. But also I would choose lower fat cuts because the red meat has much more saturated fat than the white meat, the chicken and the turkey. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next, is coffee safe to drink with CKD, and how much fluid intake is typically appropriate?
So the coffee should be okay in, 1 or 2 cups of coffee. And it's no negative effects on CKD. The problem with the coffee drinks in general would be that what we drink the coffee with, right? It's not just the caffeine in the coffee. Let's say if you have black coffee, yes, 1 or 2 a day cups would be okay, versus we put a lot of sugar and cream and saturated fat in it. So then if you have diabetes, or you increase risk of heart disease, that's not going to be as good, right? So it's not the coffee, then it's just kind of what comes with the coffee. If you don't, let's say if you have some black coffee or coffee with maybe non-fat or low-fat milk, or a milk alternative that doesn't have a lot of added sugar and saturated fat, that would be okay. And I was not sure the second part of the question. I don't remember, what was that?
Yeah, the second part was just sort of generally the recommended fluid intake with CKD.
Oh, fluid intake. Well, it depends. For most people would be just normal. I mean, even this one is just a general recommendation. I don't know your activity level, your body size, but let's say 8 cups of fluid in a day. It's kind of what we try to say, at least. Some people might get away with a bit less, but some people, they need more, but 8 cups would be okay. Now, if it's more stage 5 or closer to dialysis, depending on your output of urine, you might need to restrict the fluid intake. So that would be a special case, versus if you're more like a stage 3 and you create enough urine, there are no problems with that. I would aim for 8 cups a day.
Great, thank you. Next, do you mind clarifying? We have someone who was a little bit confused about your recommendation of avoiding low salt and low sodium products, and then also recommending, more of a low sodium diet generally. Do you mind clarifying what you meant there?
Yeah, so when I was saying try to avoid the light products like salt or low sodium salts, the reason was because those products, they're basically salt substitutes, what we call. And instead of sodium chloride, they usually use potassium chloride, but that will add this kind of form of potassium that's highly absorbable, and that may be detrimental based on your stage and your potassium labs, right? That can increase your blood levels of potassium. So we don't want to use that product that, yes, it's lower in sodium, but now adds potassium to your picture, which is not great. The idea would be, can we use less salt, period? Can we use herbs and spices and condiments and other things versus using those salt substitutes that can create, they kind of fix the problem, but create a different one.
Got it. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Last question. Are you aware of nutrition recommendations differing for patients with polycystic kidney disease or cancer-related kidney disease?
Yeah, so, well, I think in general, I mean, if the kidney function is affected, I'm gonna be the same kind of recommendations, right? Like if, let's say, having those conditions decrease your kidney function, and then you have a lower GFR and a decreased kidney function. So there's the same kind of recommendations. Like, I'm not sure if you refer to, in addition to that, if there are other things that you could do. But if, again, if those diseases, which they can decrease, affect how well the kidney works, it will be the same recommendations.
Okay, great. Thank you. As I mentioned, though, we will save anything that wasn't answered live today, and we'll share a spreadsheet where you can see answers to those. But I just wanted to thank you all for joining us here at Community Health Resource Center and National Kidney Foundation for this presentation. And thank you to Elena for leading this wonderful series. I hope everyone has a great evening. And as a reminder, this session was recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered by the end of this week.
We'll see you next week.